This event is being live streamed on UNTV and is therefore publicly available to a large audience. The event is also being recorded, and the recording will be shared with all of you after the meeting concludes. The agenda for this event will be posted in the chat box shortly for your reference. Participants have the opportunity to ask questions, and we encourage you to do so by clicking on the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screens. We kindly ask you to introduce yourselves and name your organization before your question. We will do our best to answer as many of your questions as possible. This session has two moderators. Firstly, Ms. Nathalie Boucher, who is the Senior Strategic Advisor for the UNDP Regional Hub of Arab States and the Acting Manager for the Sub-Regional Response Facility for the Syria crisis. She is joined by Moises Venancio, who is a Policy Advisor for the UNDP Regional Bureau of Arab States. That being said, it is time to hear from our two co-chairs who will give opening remarks. Firstly, Her Excellency, Ms. Elina Kalku, who is the Under-Secretary of State for Development Policy at the Ministry for Foreign Affairs, Finland. And secondly, Ms. Sarah Poole, who is the Regional Director for the UNDP Regional Bureau of Arab States. This is all from my side. Let me now hand over to our first co-chair, Her Excellency, Ms. Elina Kalku.
Thank you and good afternoon, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. This year, the Syria crisis is entering its 10th year. A protracted crisis which has brought immense suffering for millions of Syrians. At the same time, the countries in the region continue to generously host most of the Syrian refugees and bear a large brunt of the crisis. With the pandemic, economic and financial instability, political turmoil and shrinking government revenue, their resilience is truly challenged. The international community must continue to support the countries in the region and to help Syrians to find a lasting political solution. This is the only way to ensure a sustainable peace for Syria and better stability and future for the whole region. People throughout the region deserve better. During the past years, the UNDP and Finland have been cooperating in driving the resilience agenda in Syria crisis response. The aim has been to allow for a better and more flexible and comprehensive crisis response. Finland has supported UNDP's resilience work as the UNDP co-leads the regional refugee and resilience planning together with the UNHCR. In 2017, in a Helsinki conference on supporting Syria and the region, the OCHA, UNHCR and UNDP, together with their NGO partners, launched a 2-year 3RP plan. By now, many lessons have been learned. UNDP's sub-regional response facility has put together excellent state of resilience reports that draw valuable lessons for planning and implementation of crisis response. For example, we now understand that in the context of a protracted crisis, we need to combine humanitarian and development approaches to build the resilience of both the refugees and the impacted host communities in ways which promote sustainable livelihoods and better well-being for all. We need a much more integrated work, including regional and country-level strategies, support for communities' coping mechanism, improved connections between policy level and local action, and integrated programs for both urban and rural communities. A strategic shift has been needed in the way aid is delivered. We need to respond to crisis in a comprehensive manner and to build resilience so that societies, communities, and individuals can reduce the occurrence of shocks that affect them. I want to thank the UNDP and UNHCR for having pioneered an innovative model. As multiple crises unfold at the same time now in the countries affected by the Syria crisis, we need a comprehensive resilience approach more than ever. Sufficient, flexible, multi-year humanitarian financing is, of course, part of this. Ladies and gentlemen, at times of crisis, it is the most vulnerable who bear the biggest burden. Persons with disabilities yet far too often excluded. Here we all must commit ourselves to leaving no one behind. I also encourage all to implement the Charter on Inclusion of Persons with Disabilities in Humanitarian Action, which my country spearheaded as part of a coalition of member states and agencies. We also need to prevent children from dropping out of school. I cannot think of a better investment than giving children a chance to go to school and learn. They are our common future and they should not be refugees or left in the middle of conflicts in the first place. We need initiatives that create jobs and income and future prospects for the youth. The region needs to restore hope and create renewed positive energy for people to rebuild their lives. Our focus should also be on women and girls in Syria and in affected areas. We must put women's rights and needs at the center of humanitarian action and combat sexual and gender-based violence, especially in times of lockdowns. Women are agents of change when given the chance. Finland is constantly promoting the landmark UN Security Council Resolution 1325 on women, peace and security. We have had the pleasure to support the drafting of 1325 national action plans in Lebanon, Jordan and Iraq. More women must play a central role in humanitarian action and building societies. Finally, the private sector has a crucial role to play if we want to strengthen resilience, not only as a source of revenue, but as a source of innovations, new skills, jobs, technologies, and ideas that also help in addressing humanitarian challenges. This can be about access to energy, clean water, housing, healthcare, education, or waste management. We need to find more ways to engage the private sector. Thank you all for participating in this side event today. In times of so many reasons for despair, we must be motivated by hope. We must not give up. My own country was a fragile, even a failed state in the beginning of last century, with civil war and later in the 40s, the deeply divided society, having to settle a number of people around the country as evacuees. Resilience, we believe, is worth pursuing, and it is a multifaceted and comprehensive effort. It was a long journey for my country to become a Nordic welfare state with lots of stability. We are here to commit ourselves to efforts to meet the multiple humanitarian needs and to find new ways to strengthen the resilience of our partner countries and their societies. Let's use this opportunity to drive our shared agenda forward. Welcome and thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for your opening remarks. I would now like to hand over to Acting UNDP Regional Bureau of Arab States Director, Ms. Sarah Poole.
Thank you so much for giving me the floor, and Excellency, participants, and dear colleagues. First, let me also very warmly welcome you to today's discussion, and it's very much my pleasure to be co-hosting this important event with Ms. Elina Kalku, the Under Secretary of State for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Finland. And I'm also really delighted to see that even virtually, we have so many friends of resilience with us today. The government of Finland has been a very close and committed partner for us over the years in spearheading the resilience agenda within the strategic framework of the Regional Refugee and Resilience Plan, or the 3RP, that we as UNDP have been co-leading with UNHCR since 2015 as part of a long-standing and renewed partnership. Tracking and stimulating dialogue around the resilience agenda, identifying and sharing good practices, fostering innovation have all been at the heart of UNDP's partnership with the government of Finland. Our State of Resilience reports have notably highlighted a range of promising approaches at all levels and across multiple sectors, which are achieving impact and are ready to be taken to scale. I would also like to echo Ms. Kalku in expressing my very deep appreciation for all the efforts made by our colleagues from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Finland, as well as our UNDP colleagues leading the sub-regional facility for the Syria crisis, who came together to organize this event in the run-up to the 4th edition of the Brussels Conference on Supporting the Future of Syria and the Region. Let me also extend our deep thanks to the government partners, our sister agencies, donors, NGOs, and civil society organizations for their interest and readiness to join the conversation and also to share insights. I would also like at the outset to take this opportunity to extend a special welcome to His Excellency Dr. Rabadi, the Minister of Planning and International Cooperation in Jordan. Our event indeed comes at such an important juncture as the government of Jordan just launched a few days ago the new cycle of its national response to the Syria crisis. Since 2013, the UNDP sub-regional facility for the Syria crisis has been promoting a resilience response in neighboring countries most affected by the protracted Syria crisis, an approach which seeks to strengthen synergies between humanitarian and development action for greater impact and sustainability, in a way that not only has brought results to the sub-region, but also yielded lessons which fed into the new way of working agreed at the 2016 World Humanitarian Summit. The regional context is now characterized by multiple crises compounding each other: the protracted Syria crisis, COVID-19, the economic and fiscal crisis in Lebanon, and the oil price drop, which also affects Iraq. As a result, unemployment, poverty, and particularly challenges facing women, persons with disabilities, as well as other multifaceted vulnerabilities are on the rise, while capacities of governments to deliver basic services, including social protection, are under severe pressure. In such a context, working together to strengthen the response capacities of national and local institutions to support sustainable livelihoods, opportunities for all, and to foster social cohesion and stability is not a choice, it's an imperative. Meanwhile, efforts to secure inclusive access to basic services and livelihoods in neighboring countries and also inside Syria will affect prospects for voluntary, dignified, and safe returns. The worrisome developments we are witnessing clearly challenge the boundaries of the resilience response. Expanding partnerships, including with the private sector, and working in a more integrated manner, including with the international financial institutions, are important considerations. Leveraging innovation and addressing the specific needs of youth and women while empowering them to play key roles in resilience building are amongst the critical issues to think through. As our UNDP Associate Administrator highlighted at the EU UN panel on regional recovery in the face of COVID-19 that took place earlier this week, 2020 cannot be business as usual for international support to the region. The resilience approach is firmly rooted in the 3RP and is increasingly integrated in country responses tailored to national priorities and challenges. Resilience programming has significantly expanded from 28% of the total 3RP funding requirements in 2015 to 45% in 2020. However, financial support continues to fall short of needs. Reportedly, only 13% of the ask for resilience for this year was funded as of the 1st of June. Our joint event today is a renewed and timely opportunity to reflect on the impact as well as the value of our work on resilience, and to look forward to what we can do even better to address the vulnerabilities and challenges that have been facing refugees and host communities, as well as national economies and institutions in the region for almost 10 years, and which are now further exacerbated by the far-reaching impacts of the COVID-19 and other crises. We need to strengthen our resolve to develop a more inclusive, gender-responsive, and integrated response, and to help countries build back better to fulfill their commitment to the 2030 Agenda and the Sustainable Development Goals and the pledge to leave no one behind. Today's conversation will benefit from a wide range of perspectives, which I am sure will contribute to improve as well as to elevate the resilience agenda. Thank you again so much, and I look forward to today's discussion. Thank you.
Thank you for your opening remarks. I would now like to hand over to my colleague Moises Venancio, who is one of the two moderators.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Undersecretary Kalku and Sarah. for setting the stage as we begin our discussions in earnest right now. And as you know, this session now will very much focus on looking really at what have been some of the key achievements that we have actually registered on resilience over the past few years in dealing with the very complicated fallout of the Syria crisis in the region. I'm very happy also, but also an opportunity to look at, given the evolution of events in the region and the socioeconomic situation, also how we're going to build on that and very much evolve the resilience response and adapt it to what is clearly, again, a sign of rising vulnerability and the need to ensure both growth, stability, and of course, fulfilling the SDGs in the long run. I'm very glad that for this session, we have a very distinguished panel. We have Minister Wissam Rabadi from Jordan. Thank you, Excellency, for joining us. We have the great Mr. Michael Kohler from the EU and their coordination office, our Res Rep in Lebanon, Céline Moreau, and our Res Rep in Turkey, Claudio Tomasi. And then we're also joined, thank you very much, by two representatives from two agencies that have a very particular role within the resilience framework in the region, Mr. Frank Hageman from the ILO and Sam Rose from UNRWA. And thank you very much for joining us and being part of this panel today. Having said that, and time is tight, I would like to pass over firstly to Mr. Michael Kohler to give us an overview of his perception of resilience in the region and certainly achievements, but also challenges. And I'm very happy to pass over to Michael because I think he is the embodiment at the moment of the humanitarian development nexus. He was for a long time the backbone of the EU's support to development in the region and has now joined the coordination office. So Michael, you have passed the floor to me many times in Brussels, and I am now delighted to pass the floor to you to kick us off on this discussion. Thank you. And I would please like to remind all the speakers, if they could stick to the 5-minute time that we have allocated them, given we have quite a lot to get through in this virtual meeting. So thank you very much. And Michael, all over to you.
Thank you very much, Moise. I hope you hear me well, and great to see you in good shape after so many months of confinement. Very, very happy to be with you, with Dr. Rabadi and all the other distinguished panelists in this discussion. And indeed, you know, I was a bit hesitant, so to say, to formulate my contribution to what we are going to discuss this afternoon, because I know very well what humanitarian aid is. I also know very well what development aid is. But what is resilience? Now, PhD theses have been drafted about that. There are lots of strategy papers. The Commission, the European Commission itself, has published 2 communications in 2012 and 2017 on the concept of resilience in international aid. And still, it's somehow a fluffy concept if you look at it from a theoretical point of view. But once you go to the field, once you go to Lebanon, to Jordan, to Iraq, to Turkey, once you see the refugees, and once you see the environment they are living in, this becomes extremely tangible. It is no longer theoretical. Because, and if I look at it from a humanitarian point of view, what we can no longer do in such a protracted crisis and in such a difficult environment is simply look at the immediate humanitarian needs of the people that we find there as refugees and their host communities. Yes, we need to provide for food needs. Yes, we need to provide shelter. Yes, there are nutrition problems. Yes, there are the problems of legal protection and so forth. But we all know that humanitarian needs are on the rise, very much so, and also inside Syria. And we know that the countries, the societies, the communities where the refugees live are extremely under strain. I don't want to go very much into detail. I think all the participants in this discussion know full well what the economic situation in Lebanon is right now. And I don't even want to mention the situation inside Syria, where I think we are moving into a scenario where international assistance, humanitarian aid, which, as you know, is impartial, is independent, and has to remain neutral, and has to be deployed to all people in need, regardless on which political side of the conflict they may stand. But, you know, we are in a situation inside Syria where today we are no longer faced with the need to cater for the humanitarian needs of people who are displaced, internally displaced persons, or people who are suffering from combat action or from terrorist acts. No, with the economic developments, and COVID is now adding to this, we have a double or triple problem. Large parts of the population on the one hand, are in humanitarian need, and on the other hand, I think their coping mechanisms to deal with further external shocks, and the latest one is COVID, and nobody should be mistaken by the very low figures that we are hearing out of Syria or from neighboring countries. Either these statistics are not reliable or there is simply not enough testing. COVID will hit these communities and will hit them not only as a health problem, but also as, of course, a socio-economic problem, maybe even more so. So all this, of course, stresses enormously the coping mechanism, the coping ability of people in the country, in the situation, in the region. And therefore, we all need to get together. We need to mobilize the means that we have. We cannot hide behind the kind of limits of the definition of what humanitarian should do, development should do, peace building should do. No, we have to look at it in a nexus approach. And I think the nexus approach here, humanitarian development, peace building, becomes really concrete when it comes in particular to preparedness, anticipatory action, and early response in order to help the people on the ground. Now, these are theoretical concepts, as I said, but they have become a reality. And they have become a reality in particular in a crisis as protracted as the Syrian one, where millions and millions of people are concerned. 6 million Syrians have fled the country. 11.1 million Syrians inside the country are now in need of humanitarian aid. We have more than 6 million internally displaced in the country. And if the long nature of this conflict doesn't lead us to come together and combine in a wise way, in a complementary way, humanitarian development and also political action, then frankly, we are going to fail, we are going to fall short. What we see in the Syrian crisis and the mechanisms that we have been developing over the years, where humanitarians go out of the box, go further, look into, for example, education needs, look into not only the health response in terms of vaccination, in terms of making available dispensaries and making available immediate health replies, but also look into the structures that are necessary for that. What we have seen there has, of course, been conceptualized, and has been conceptualized in the case of the European Union in so-called joint humanitarian development framework agreements between our development branch and our humanitarian branch. And we have created a number of specific tools like the European Trust Funds, and in this case, in particular, the Mother Trust Funds for the regional Syrian crisis, a trust fund that has now an allocation of more than 2 billion euros. With these trust funds, we address the resilience needs at large. And I think this is a model for the future, because we see, and the World Bank is estimating that now 46%, almost half of the world's extreme poor are living in fragile countries. Conflicts drive 80% of all humanitarian needs, and they reduce the economic performance of the country. So what we are going to see, unfortunately, in Syria is like so to say, I wouldn't say a model, but a pattern that we can see and we will see in even more conflicts and crises. So the inroads that we have made as humanitarian, as development, as peace-building operators, the mechanisms that we have developed, from humanitarian mechanisms to cooperation between humanitarian and military, while still safeguarding the independence and neutrality of our approach, the financial tools such as trust fund support, these are things in a way that stand the test of time there, and these are things that we need to roll out more generally. If we only deal with the immediate needs of the people who are in wild camps or in legal camps, or the people that are somewhere in Lebanon or somewhere in Jordan or in northern Iraq, yes, we're doing the right thing, but we don't do something that is sufficient. Because we are going to see a second generation now of the refugees. We're going to see people who will not be able to go back to Syria anytime soon. And we are going to see not only protracted crisis, but protracted needs that arise and that might well be with us in 10, 20, 30 years from now. And therefore, we need to invest, yes, in coping with the immediate needs, but we need to invest even more in the resilience. It's a long haul task. It's a task for the communities, for the governments of the regional neighbors of Syria, and it's a task definitely for the international community, both the aid officers, but also the foreign policy responsibles. And therefore, I think we need to sit down from time to time and really assess what has been done. And in terms of a needs assessment, see which kind of resilience we have to develop, how we can address the communities, how we can take them on board as operators, how we can localize our response. And thirdly, and most importantly, I think, how we can really ensure that the resilience response is not only a response for refugees, but a response for host communities, for the local societies, and turning our work on livelihoods, turning our work on resilience at large into a win-win scenario for all the people that live around Syria, and not only for those who suffer most and who have fled the country. I think this is a very important condition for success. I would like just to take the opportunity, Moise, to end with my really warm and heartfelt words of thanks and praise for the governments of Jordan, Lebanon, Egypt, and Turkey and Iraq, for the many people that are helping here, and for the operators of aid on the ground that are the first responders and invest day to day in the resilience that we are going to talk about in the coming hour. Thank you very much.
Michael, thank you very, very much. And I think that really stands us well now to dig in to the issues around the resilience that we want to discuss this morning. But thank you very much also, I think, for highlighting some really key aspects behind the resilience approach. Firstly, the need that we have to address not just the protracted crisis, but the protracted needs over time that will remain with us, I think, for a long time, but also the importance of resilience as something that needs to link the peace building, the humanitarian and the development, and also to crisscross the various needs that we have in the country amongst all the vulnerable groups, while at the same time also addressing some of the longer standing socioeconomic structural challenges. So thank you very, very much for that. Based on that overview of the region, I really will now pass to some of the specific questions that we had for our panelists. And I really want to begin, of course, with His Excellency Minister Rabadi from Jordan, and really for him to focus on some of the challenges, the issues, and the achievements around institution building within the resilience approach. It's not always everybody's top priority, and yet it is, of course, a central and fundamental tenet in helping these countries cope with the fallout, not just of the Syria crisis, but now with COVID and also some of the other socioeconomic challenges that remain in the region. So thank you very much, Minister Rabadi, and over to you, please.
Thank you, Moses, and thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, perfectly, and we see you now well as well. Thank you very much, Excellency.
Okay, well, thank you very much, and thanks for the government of Finland and the UNDP for putting this together. You know, the COVID-19 has a heavy impact on all countries, but particularly in countries like Jordan, where we host a large number of refugees, about 3.6 million refugees. 1.3 million of that is Syrian refugees. So think about it, that's 14% of the country's population. Before COVID, we were already facing some difficult economic situation, high rates of poverty and high rates of increasing unemployment. This, of course, was coupled with a noticeable decline in humanitarian assistance. Of course, the global pandemic proved the need for resilient systems and institutions that are capable to maintaining services for people. With COVID, of course, there was an increased demand on public services and infrastructure, which put a huge strain on service delivery. Here in Jordan, we, along with the UNHCR, we developed a mechanism, which is the Jordan Response Plan. It's a 3-year rolling plan that incorporates humanitarian and resilience intervention. It's a paradigm shift, really, in refugees response, which is developed through close collaboration between the government of Jordan, UN agencies, donor organizations and countries, and NGOs, both local NGOs and international NGOs. Of course, in the Jordan Response Plan, protection has a broader umbrella. That means meaningful access to services and empowerment of beneficiary. The JRP translate this under different sectors, including WASH, which is access to safe drinking water, solid waste management, and reaching different various sectors and areas, but also focusing on livelihood. That includes providing work permits, flexible permits, home-based businesses, particularly for women, entrepreneurship, etc. So that mechanism really is helping Jordan to respond and to strengthen both the institutional resilience, both at the national level and at the individual level. And it's really important here to affirm our call on donors and international community to mobilize their role through sustainable and predictable financial support that is directed toward institutional capacity development to ensure that the institutions are capable to maintain provision of services. Also at this stage, it is really critical to improve the self-reliance of vulnerable groups through projects that have tangible impact, as in accredited education, reliable livelihood, amongst other. We need to invest in the capacity of Syrian refugees through quality education and livelihood. The long-term resilience building is enriched by the Jordan Response Plan 2022, which we happen to launch, as Sarah said, we just launched a couple of days ago. This resilience, both at the individual level and the institutional level. This year, we have also added the infrastructure and institutional capacity development as a response type to the Jordan Response Plan, along with refugee and host communities. So in order to, to the topic of back to your question, in order to strengthen the institutional resilience at national and local level, we need to invest really in local resources, both institution and individuals. Meanwhile, fostering the role of civil society organization. For us here in Jordan, we invest in the resilience and self-reliance of Syrian refugees through a number of mechanisms. For example, in education, to provide free, inclusive, pre-primary, primary, and secondary education at Ministry of Education schools. Scholarship for tertiary vocational training and higher education. On the health front is to provide free access to primary, vaccine, and maternity services. Secondary health services are 80% subsidized for Syrians, which is very similar very much to uninsured Jordanians are treated the same. Also, another mechanism is livelihood, where here in Jordan we waive fees for work permit. And we're currently working, and we just finished the instructions and regulations to allow flexible work schemes in all sectors that is open for any non-Jordanians. Of course, home business, as I mentioned, home-based businesses, particularly for women, is critical, and the support of entrepreneurship and SMEs. So again, we emphasize and urge the international community to strengthen and continue financing programs of tangible output and investing and supporting the infrastructure. We just listened yesterday to a presentation by the World Bank on their recent report, Fallout of War, which shares the same perception toward resilience resilient systems, and how the Syrian conflict impacted the service and infrastructure and contributed to already pre-existing problems. And let me mention just a couple of facts from the report, and I'll stop. The report shows that the number of primary healthcare centers increased over the period 2010 to 2018, from around 1,453 to over 1,594 centers. Although the centers for per capita or per person decreased, and that is really due to the increased number of refugees. The fiscal share of healthcare expenditure decreased from 14.4 to 12, which is a significant decrease. But in the health, and in this particular sector, and one of the mechanisms in order to support this sector and the service delivery in the healthcare, we, with our partners, created a multi-donor account, an MDA, that was established as an example of international community financial support to Jordan through national systems and existing, basically, structure to cover some of the health needs resulting from the increase in demand due to the influx of Syrian refugees. We hope, and we have another multi-donor account for education. We just recently, with the USAID and the UK and Spain, we launched another multi-donor account for social protection for Jordanian, and I think these kind of mechanisms really strengthen institutions both at the national and at the local levels. So, you know, with that, I emphasize that the pandemic shows how fragile the health system across the globe is, and access to adequate health services is a human right. So in Jordan, we adapt inclusive policies that could guarantee health access to Jordanian and Syrians alike, which caused additional pressure. We need to continue investing in infrastructure, in institutions, building the capacity, using national structures and national systems in order to continue responding to the refugee crisis. I will stop here and give it back to you, Moses.
Minister, thank you very, very much. First of all, congratulations, I think, on the Jordan response plan, which is very much spearheading the response right now. Also, thank you very much for outlining some of the difficulties across the sectors in Jordan, and particularly with regard to the pressures that you have in managing the health sector. But I think certainly your point on the need to invest in local resources, whether they be government, whether they be people, but also the important role of civil society in all of this, I think is very well noted. So very much a multifaceted approach, I think, to strengthening national institutions in the country as part of the resilience approach. And obviously, I think the point that you highlighted on using national systems with multi-donor approaches, I think, is also very important under these current conditions. So thank you very much for that. Celine, I think I'm going to call on you now, and of course we are looking to you also as a practitioner and somebody who is very much now in the field trying to cope with managing response to and supporting the authorities in Lebanon with the fallout of the Syria crisis, the development challenges in Lebanon, but also now increasingly the need to respond to COVID. So it'd be great to hear from you what some of the challenges are around this, but also what some of the opportunities are in order that we merge the responses into comprehensive, coherent frameworks, as opposed to perhaps having different responses that go in slightly different directions. So Celine, all over to you, please.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, and thanks again for the opportunity to participate in this side event. And thanks, Moses, for the introduction. I think a lot of the issues I wanted to raise were also highlighted by the previous speaker, but let me highlight a few things. I think first, as we are seeing in many parts of the world, but including in this region in Lebanon, I think we're really looking at a situation of compounded crisis. I mean, in Lebanon, we have obviously the impact of the Syria crisis, but this is being compounded by an economic and a financial crisis, and obviously COVID accelerating many of the issues that the country was facing, especially exacerbated by the lockdown that was in place and now that is being eased. So I think we all agree that building and strengthening resilience is as ever important as before, and focusing on helping communities prepare, cope, and recover from shocks, and hopefully gradually building back a better life. And in many ways, I mean, this framework is very much in line with the socioeconomic framework that was launched by the UN in the aftermath of, in the context of COVID, with these notions around helping cope, but also building back better, to try to also leap toward, a more hope and a better future. If I reflect on Lebanon, I think we have a Lebanon crisis response plan that is actually based on a comprehensive response that brings together the humanitarian and the resilience component. And I think in an effort to serve Lebanese host community and Syrian refugees. I believe that as the first speakers were saying, I think it's the challenge today and tomorrow is to try to see how you leverage this platform also to bring together a comprehensive response to the broader challenges that Lebanon is facing in a way that brings together a humanitarian and development nexus, and in a way that brings also expanding partnership within a kind of comprehensive framework. I think the conversations are starting in Lebanon, and they hopefully they will be continued moving forward so that we can respond to a broader set of vulnerabilities. I think if I'm trying to think through some of the lessons from how to integrate and better integrate and strengthen the resilience in the context of the response to Syria crisis, COVID, and the broader situation that we are facing now. I think just to retake some of the words from the previous speaker, continued focus on system strengthening, I think is a must. I think one of the mainstay of the response here has been the use of national system and public institutions for service delivery. This has been done in the context of the LCRP, and I think that's also the main focus in the context of responding to COVID, and specifically the health and the non-health aspect, leveraging the health system, strengthening it, but going through the public health system. And also leveraging the work of municipalities to provide comprehensive responses. Second, I would say it's continuing to putting people first and at the center of the response. So looking how we continue to expand coping mechanisms at the times where we are seeing new vulnerabilities, but also aggravated vulnerabilities. How we strengthen safety net. So here the whole discussions around social protection and how to strengthen social protection, not just for the short term, but in terms of a sustained approach. And obviously looking at scaling up livelihoods, I think in Lebanon this is a must, as we are seeing vulnerabilities increasing in the context of the SCRP, but I think across the country. Third elements, I think what we have seen in Lebanon, and I think that could be applied maybe in other countries, is that the need to build resilience also through enhancing the localization of the response, with national and local actors being involved in the design, the coordination of the response, with particular focus on building capacities and systems that will help to manage not just a particular shocks, but many shocks. And I think a lot of the work that has been done in terms of strengthening system within the LCRP, I think that all the work that is being done in terms of the localization of aid with local NGOs, taking more and more of the leadership, and also the work that has been done in looking at how you strengthen more generally preparedness in the country, straddling between the response to the refugee crisis, but the national preparedness infrastructure in Lebanon, where you have disaster risk management committees across the countries that are really trying to help withstand some of the shocks, I think is something that we need to continue to invest in. Finally, I would say that as situations becomes more and more vulnerable, I think we need to ensure the key components of resilience is being conflict sensitive and hence do no harm. I believe that we need to be able to design our interventions with this very good understanding of the context. And as some of the speakers have said, how the context within which support is being provided in the context of refugees, host communities, and the broader context around those groups, so that we are mindful of tensions that exist or tensions that could be exacerbated, so that we understand what could be those tension dynamics. We have mitigation measures in place, and we can continue to provide support in a way that helps and does not negate. That would be it for me. Over.
Celine, that was lovely. Thank you very much for that. And certainly coming from you right now in the field coping with these things, I took away, I think, 3 key things. One is that important point of build back better. I think that's really crucial. And I think that's something that is very much the backbone of resilience, and linking that not only with the minister's emphasis on the need to use local systems, but also I think what Michael was saying about really that we are going to have protracted needs for many years to come. So I think really that fits in really well as an overall direction for the approach that we need to take. I think also the fact that you mentioned again the need to support local systems and to have comprehensive approaches that include, I think, livelihoods and also the social safety nets, as well as preparedness, are points that are very well taken. Thanks very much, Celine. I think we'll pass over to Claudio now, the UNDP Res Rep in Turkey, and it's wonderful to have Turkey come in this meeting. Of course, we deal with the Arab countries and the Arab world, so it's wonderful to hear the voice of Turkey in a meeting too. And Claudio, really, we look to you to look to a subject which we do not dwell on, or have not dwelt on, I think, sufficiently up until now, and that's very much how we combine the IFI resources presence with the resources that we all have in terms of managing support to resilience and bilateral resources. So I think there has not always been a meeting of the minds and the purses around how we cooperate together. So it will be wonderful to hear from you, Claudia, your experience and to have that benefit, how we can improve our overall coordination with IFIs with regard to supporting and strengthening the resilience approach. Thank you. Over to you, Claudio.
Thank you very much, Moises, and thanks for the invitation. I'm very happy to participate to this Zoom meeting. And it would be difficult, I guess, not to repeat some of the points that have been raised, but I try to tailor this to Turkey and to what you kindly asked to focus on. So first of all, let me thank you, the government of Finland, for organizing this event, and also to the UNDP colleagues for making it possible at such critical time. We know that the Brussels conference marks a key event, this time in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, and is critical in the previous days and weeks to take stock of the lessons learned and the progress achieved through the resilience agenda over the past years, to better inform also our recovery response to COVID-19 in a way that further support refugees, host communities, and public institutions that serve them. I will focus a little bit later on the IFIs and the question that you have asked. But first, let me start by highlighting that the implementation of a resilience response here in Turkey has been made possible by mainly 4 elements. One is a strong political will. Second is an inclusive policy framework. Third is a budgetary commitment, and fourth is a quite strong institutional capacity of Turkish government and public institutions. And this, of course, in responding to the hosting the largest refugee population in the world, has been a very important basis for the United Nations and for the 3RP to build upon. So the Turkey provision of access to national systems such as health, education, employment, and social services to Syrians under temporary protection stands, of course, at the basis of quite a successful experience. Having said so, the Turkish response and support provided through the Regional Refugee and Resilience Plans for Turkey, the 3RP, continue to stand out globally and has informed through numerous good practices, and most recently at the Global Refugee Forum, December last year, ways forward in responding to refugee situations. So something that we have been doing has been supporting reality here in Turkey, but also conveying good practices, a scaling up of what's going on here to the benefit of the global debate. It's also important to highlight that Turkey itself has been the main funding source of this impressive effort. So far, according to the official government data, this has been totaling around 40 billion US dollars since the beginning of the crisis from the public administration coffers. In line with the principle of burden sharing, highlighted in the Global Compact on Refugees, of course, the international community has also made resources available to support Turkey in this unprecedented effort. And more or less, we're talking about 4 billion that has been mobilized through the 3RP since 2015. So this is to give you an idea of the scale. The resilience component within the 3RP has been growing year on year for Turkey since the inception of the plan. And in this last 2020, for the first time, is basically having the majority of the appeal over the humanitarian component. And that, I think, is an important element to highlight also the focus that increasingly we are taking here in Turkey. Also, the funding secured by the resilience component has been steadily growing, however, is not comparable to the humanitarian side, in the sense that the pledging for the resilience component has proven to be more complex and less responsive than the humanitarian, which is also an element that we need to highlight. And there are several reasons for that one. So the integrated response is speaking more and more to results on key aspects of resilience, in particular in support to the capacity of public institutions, in terms of support to local municipalities, in terms of infrastructure projects, rehabilitation of different services at the municipal level, but also in our work with the private sector, that the 3RP partners altogether have facilitated access of around 10,000 Syrians to jobs and the creation of additional 1,500 businesses. That we know how this is key, how this is important, especially in a situation where the economy right now is slowing down, is actually going down now with the COVID-19. And of course, the integration of Syrian under temporary protection within the economic fabric of Turkey becomes more difficult because of this. So this is a particular space and for attention and for work for the 3RP partners here in Turkey. Coming to your question about the IFIs, this cooperation with the IFIs becomes even more important as we speak, since, as you probably know, among the 3RP supporters, the EU has been playing a lion's share. And within the second tranche of the EU facility for Turkey, the biggest part, the biggest chunk has been basically assigned to the IFIs in Turkey, which makes them basically now playing a double role. One as, let's say, loan providers, credit institutions, international credit institution, but also as now implementers and implementing partners of EU funds within the response of the 3RP. Of course, this poses serious challenges for the actual setup of the work here in Turkey, because mainly of the limited physical presence and outreach of IFIs on the territory. And that's why, as the 3RP partners, we are working day in, day out on how to play a positive role in order to overcome such challenges. Of course, we have also conducted an in-depth analysis of the various types of supports provided by IFIs, bilateral partners, direct funding to government, the different basically modalities of intervention under the 3RP. And this has shown that the 3RP partners have been working with a wider range of government partners, but also that the bulk of interventions aiming at the strengthening of public system has been enabling the absorption capacity of the public institution. And this is something that we want and we aim to maintain also in this new phase, where the IFIs will play the double role that I have mentioned before. I think this is quite a unique situation around the world. So we are writing somehow a history as we speak in order to see how to maximize the comparative advantages of the different institutions involved into this. But definitely the issue of bringing this up to a scale is one of the key issues here in Turkey, whether it is government finance, whether it is a EU finance, whether it's IFI credits, whether it's 3RP partners implementation or financed, the issue of bringing up to a scale remains very much at the center of the debate, especially in the job creation and especially in the integration part of the agenda, because we are talking about major numbers, as you know. So let me move to the final part of my
okay, Claudia, because you really have 1 minute left at this point.
Yes.
Sorry, thank you.
Yes, by saying that another challenge that we are facing and we are working upon is how to integrate this work of the 3RP with the National Development Plan and the SDG priorities here in Turkey, since this is mainly financed by national institutions. It becomes even more important. The convergences are there, and especially priorities on economic development, qualified people and healthy society and social services. And as UNDP, of course, we are playing an integrator role around this agenda. Let me conclude by saying that, of course, there are quite, with some word of cautions, especially in this transition phase when the humanitarian money goes down, the resilience pledge goes up, and we're moving into the National Development Plan financing and joint venture.
Okay.
And there is a serious risk for a gap in this transition that is possibly affecting social cohesion and self-reliance, also in the light of COVID-19 new challenges. So I will let it at this point and conclude my 5 minutes with this one. And thanks again. I hope this is useful for the debate. Thank you very much, Moises. And
Claudio, thank you very much. Thank you again for highlighting the national systems and integrated response. And also, I think with the IFIs, what you were saying was really to have a better analysis of what we are all doing and coming together and trying to see how we can articulate activities that can also be scaled up. And I think your last point, certainly on the challenges, that gaps may appear at the time when humanitarian funding may go down and other funding is not necessarily available, I think is something that is well taken and noted and something that we need to further assess. Also, the role of Turkey, I think, in supporting all of this inside the country is well noted. So thank you very much. We are running a little bit late, so apologies if I am going to ask the next 2 speakers also to please stick to their 5 minutes. And in the meantime, please, if you have further questions, please do put them in the chat box so we can get to them after the next round of the next 2 speakers. Thank you. Frank, thank you very much. The ILO has a particular role in all these resilience responses, given its very special mandate. So it'll be wonderful to pass over to you to hear your views and your perceptions on resilience challenges and certainly how we can improve the resilience approach in the region. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Moise. Can you hear me?
Perfectly, and we see you too.
Okay. Good afternoon to everyone. Greetings from Amman, from where I'm currently joining you. And thanks very much to the organizers, the government of Finland, and of course UNDP, for having me on this panel. I would like to take a few minutes to highlight the plight of refugee workers in the context of COVID-19 and what can be done to strengthen their integration into local labor markets while improving labor market outcomes for host communities at the same time. Now, we at the ILO have long called for comprehensive approaches to the refugee crisis that respond to the short-term and immediate needs of the most vulnerable, while simultaneously paving the way for addressing structural imbalances and deficiencies in the economies and labor markets of host countries. The ILO's experience in addressing the employment and decent work needs of refugees and host communities in the region has given us the knowledge, the tools, and the outreach to respond to the economic and livelihood challenges brought about by the COVID-19 pandemic. Let me give you a few examples. First, we are promoting a more inclusive social protection framework for vulnerable workers through technical assistance to establish an emergency unemployment fund in Jordan and an inclusive emergency cash assistance scheme in Lebanon. Second, we are promoting occupational safety and health in COVID-19 responses through making guidelines accessible to refugees in Turkey and raising awareness and capacity of employers and workers in Jordan and Lebanon, mainly in the agricultural sector. Thirdly, we are supporting business continuity, resilience, and decent job retention in SMEs in Lebanon and Jordan through the injection of funds and tools development. In Turkey, for instance, 900 small businesses will receive micro-grants to ensure business continuity and job retention. Fourth, we are improving labor governance in Iraq through building the capacity of the labor inspection and occupational safety and health systems in the country and helping design a holistic national plan in response to COVID-19 at the workplace, which is inclusive of all workers, i.e. Iraqi nationals, as well as refugees and internally displaced. Fifth, we are promoting skills transfer and e-learning in various occupations for host communities and Syrian refugees in Jordan and Lebanon. Close to 20,000 Jordanian nationals and Syrian refugees, including persons with disabilities, have upgraded their skills so far through skills development interventions. And finally, I wish to highlight the extension of the Transition to Formality program in Turkey. Through the reimbursement of social security premiums and work permit fees, employers are supported to retain formal employment and uphold access to social protection for their workers. Now, from such experiences, we have learned that if we want to build the resilience of refugees and most vulnerable host communities, and as countries across the region continue to ease lockdown measures and reopen again, we must concentrate on three vital aspects. The first aspect is that we need to promote an evidence-based approach to help us leverage policy changes and socio-economic recovery programs in order to address the needs of those hardest hit by the pandemic. I give you two examples from our recent work. In Jordan, Lebanon, and Iraq, and in other parts of the region, we are working on assessments that shed light on some of the most pressing issues facing workers under COVID, both refugees and local communities, as well as businesses, and that provide insights supporting governments then in designing or adapting employment policies to address the current crisis. Another example is from Jordan, where through policy advocacy, we have supported the institutionalization of flexible work permits for Syrian refugees in specific sectors and the establishment of employment centers to support job seekers find decent jobs and training opportunities. More than 13,000 Jordanians and refugees have so far found jobs through this modality. The second lesson is that it pays to scale up interventions similar to our flagship employment intensive investment program. These employment intensive investment programs have played a critical role in restarting local economies, providing large-scale employment for some of the most vulnerable in countries that have witnessed armed conflicts and displacement in recent years. These programs are not just providing cash for work, but they also build up vital assets and infrastructure. More than 20,000 Syrian refugees, Jordanians and Lebanese, including 20% women, have benefited from income opportunities through those types of interventions. Finally, I wish to underline that while addressing workers' immediate needs, it is critical to work on improving the status of workers in the longer term through improved formalization and social protection. A good example, again, is the Transition to Formality program in Turkey, which supports employers to formalize their workforce and equally covers refugees and host community workers. Now, looking ahead, we at the ILO believe that the multilateral system needs to continue to support a resilience response to the multiple crises hitting countries hosting Syrian refugees. We advocate for a four-pillared approach. First, by providing financial support for host countries to stimulate the economy and demand for labor by using available fiscal and monetary tools and debt relief. Second, by providing evidence-based immediate assistance to sustain enterprises, preserve jobs, and support incomes for both refugees and host communities. Thirdly, by ensuring adequate protection for all those who continue to work during the crisis, be they refugees or locals. This requires guarantees for safety and health in the workplace that are inclusive and do not distinguish between locals and refugees. And fourth, and finally, by making full use of social dialogue between governments, workers, and employers' organizations to ensure consensus-driven and balanced solutions to the jobs crisis. Thank you very much. I'll stop here for the moment. Over to you again.
Yeah, Frank, thank you very much for adhering to your time. And certainly, I think those 4 points that you raised, very important: scaling up employment, investment, intensive schemes, debt relief, I think, support to businesses as they try to face the COVID challenge, and of course, the issue of social dialogue and safety in the workplace. So I think those things are very well noted. Thank you. Sam, I think very much over to you now with UNRWA, which again has a very specific mandate for a very specific vulnerable group within the resilience response. So over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Moises. Thanks to the panel organizers, and thanks for the opportunity to speak to you, and appreciate the fact that the virtual format does allow for a broader set of participants to speak. It's been a very rich conversation today, and a lot of what I will say will build on what's already been said. I'll try and be brief. I mean, UNRWA, in May of this year, we commemorated our 70th year of operation. We've been working throughout that time on humanitarian and human development work. So we're very familiar with the realities and the practical realities of these issues. Some of the things that we think of when we talk about the principles of a resilience approach in terms of working across pillars, working across programs, breaking down silos and bridging different types of divide, humanitarian development nexus, things of that nature. We recognize that this is really at the heart of good programming, and think that we can identify a number of good examples and positive examples from our work in the Syria crisis, which will hopefully be of use to others. At the same time, like the way that many have said, we do find it hard to kind of say what we mean by resilience or by a resilience approach. It's not the definition itself in terms of anticipating, withstanding, recovering, and transforming from a shock that we have difficulty with, but how to apply it and what it means in practice, particularly in relation to conflicts, a conflict setting such as the Syria crisis, when we feel it's particularly relevant in the case of the Palestinian situation, where the resilience is not really a substitute for the denial of rights. And it's important that we look at not just what crises people are facing, but why people are vulnerable. And we do find that one of the limitations of resilience is that it steers us away from the why and towards the what. Now, that speaks to some of the boundaries and the limits of what we can do or what humanitarian actors can do on their own, but it also talks for and reinforces the need for us all to work together. And I think the makeup of this panel really reflects that. We also find it quite difficult, to be honest, to talk about transformative change which is part of, part and parcel of what we often talk about when we talk about resilience, just because really the development trajectory of certainly many Palestinian refugees was not all that positive to begin with anyway. So it can become, there's a risk of it becoming quite abstract and removed from the realities of the situation that the people are facing. I think particularly when they are facing a multitude of crises. I mean, we tend to think of resilience as something positive, but it's not necessarily the case. When one crisis is coming on top or after another, communities, when we know this ourselves through the compounded effects of COVID, typically have fewer resources and are less able to respond and cope. And that applies very well to the crisis in Syria and the multiple waves of crisis and the experience of living through it. And I think we see it doesn't make people necessarily any better equipped to deal with COVID or the current socioeconomic crisis in Lebanon. But to turn this around and be a bit more positive and talk to some of the positive examples that we have and experiences from UNRWA, where we find resilience an easier construct to kind of conceptualize and understand is when we talk about the resilience of our systems. We're an organization delivering health services and schooling to over 500,000 children. And so it's the ability of those systems to respond to and adjust to repeated and protracted shocks. And from our perspective, we feel that we have some lessons. Some of them are specific to UNRWA, but that's the nature of resilience because it has to be very context specific. But others have a broader relevance, we feel, and can inform wider thinking, showing some of the benefits and the limitations of such an approach. I mean, we have schools, we run health services in Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, Gaza, and West Bank. And about 100,000 Palestine refugees have fled Syria and about 50,000 are now from Syria are now in Jordan and Lebanon. And we've been able to absorb these populations over time in our schools and in our health centers. Originally, the Palestine refugees were in separate classes because they were faced with a separate curriculum. But over time, they've been integrated into regular schooling in Syria, in Lebanon and Jordan, which makes their lives easier, but also supports community integration. We also have systems that talk across borders in terms of our registration systems, which makes it easier to monitor and track population movements, which is critical to understanding the nature of the crisis and allows our programs to work together, which is also a kind of critical element of a resilience approach. And we've also been able to use pre-existing systems and scale them up to support additional needs, to support additional beneficiaries, particularly in relation to cash assistance and building in a shock responsive element to that to meet additional needs related to the Syria crisis, but also more recently to COVID. And a lot of these benefits have not stopped with Palestine refugees. We've developed educational materials for use in UNRWA schools, self-learning and distance learning, remote learning rather, and these have been disseminated to the wider set of actors working in the Syria response. So just to say that, thinking this way, the benefits can be leveraged, and we've got 150,000 Palestine refugees have gone, but the benefits of these services have and the educational materials have gone to hundreds of thousands of children through actors such as UNICEF, who've been able to disseminate them very effectively, and that in itself then contributes to the overall stability of national systems. So, kind of multiple knock-on benefits potentially. So maybe just to end with just a summary of a few lessons that we would like to highlight. One is the importance of systems and the importance of investing in those systems. It's often not the first thing that we think of in a crisis, but particularly when crises are more protracted, such as the Syria crisis, these systems can be, the foundation of effective programming. And that's been made possible in UNRWA's case by investments over several decades by the international community. And then these systems, of course, do need to be sustained, but that's, we also know that systems and investments can be very cost effective, particularly when they're grounded in local knowledge and understanding and operated by national actors, which in a way is how UNRWA does it. We're an international organization, but with a very local character.
I'm sorry, you have 1 minute left.
Okay, and then we can talk about effective solutions often being the simplest solutions. It's not the most technologically savvy interventions that make the most difference. It's sometimes the simplest things. Most children learning remotely during COVID through UNRWA have been doing that through paper, through textbooks, complemented by technology. Then systems need to adapt and to adjust, and systems that have been affected by crisis are often better able to respond to future crises. And I think we do see some emerging positives from COVID, but we of course have to remember that the situation is far from over. Working together has worked very well, particularly with host authorities and across the sphere, given the apolitical nature of the crisis. But we know that the recovery and falling back into crisis can be more difficult for us to work together on. And I think finally, just to say that resilience for us works best when it's implemented alongside existing humanitarian interventions. When humanitarian needs are increasing and funding isn't keeping up with this, it can be very difficult to go beyond basic humanitarian support. If families cannot meet their basic needs, it's very hard to prioritize other types of support, such as livelihoods-based assistance. With that, and apologies for running over time, I will hand back to you. Thank you.
Dan, thank you very much. I think your last point was certainly an important one and very complementary, I think, to what Michael said in the beginning as well. Really, the complementarity between the humanitarian and the resilience, which is something that really needs to continue to be at the heart of our approaches in the region. But I think your other 2 points on why we don't focus so much on the why, and also the importance of systems and their resilience to the overall approach, I think are well noted. Thank you very much. Now, unfortunately, we've run a little bit longer than we wanted to, but of course, there is still room for some debate, and we have a few questions which I would like to pose to the panelists, and please come in as you wish to respond to them. And there is a subject that we have not touched too much on, and it's going to be increasingly important, I think, for resilience, and that is climate change. And how are we all looking at the impact of climate change on resilience with regard to host communities and refugees, and how are we already either addressing it within the confines of the 3RP, or what do we need to do to better address what will be the increasing effects of this on national populations. And who would like to start and provide an answer to that? If there are no volunteers, maybe Celine, could I start with you? Because I know that you've been doing a lot of work on the environment and climate change and looking at how they affect both host communities and refugees. So perhaps, would you like to kick us off on a response to that question?
Did you ask me, Moses? Sorry, I was trying to.
So I was saying, perhaps, given the work that UNDP has been doing on climate change and host communities and refugees, perhaps if you could start us off on, how much are we taking climate change into account in 3RP responses, and if there is room to do more?
Okay, thank you. I think in the context of the LCRP, one of the few objectives that kind of outline the type of impact that we want to have has to do with the issue of environment. So, I mean, it's one of the pillars of the response, looking at the impact, but more looking at to what extent our work has an impact on the environment. I think part of the conversation that is being started and will also continue to be discussed also in the context of the socioeconomic response to COVID is how do we bring issues of climate much more to the center of the response. I mean, obviously, if you look at the issue of water, in Lebanon, it will need to be looked at in terms of response also from a climate mitigation perspective. So we have started a number of discussions, for instance, with UNICEF to look at issues of water conservation. And this is something that we will be taking forward more. I must say it has not been yet at the center of the discussions, but I think there is a chance now also to make it much more at the center. Also because we are looking at bridging and looking at a much broader response beyond the LCRP and looking at more structural issues that the country needs to be addressing. Over.
Thank you for that. I'd like to ask the panelists if they have any other reactions on the link between climate change, resilience, and possibly the 3RP response. No? Okay, then maybe I'm going to go, Beth, and I think, Celine, I think you certainly highlighted the need for climate change to come much more to the fore in our 3RP approach, and I think that's something we will certainly take away, I think, from this meeting. Michael, I have a question which I think is very much, well, it's two questions, but I'm going to try and summarize it into one, and I think it's for the EU. Obviously, trying to support countries cope with the fallout of the Syria crisis and also COVID is going to rely on a number of issues, some of which we have touched upon, but also on support to macroeconomic changes, on budgetary and fiscal pressures, but also on supporting, I think, the private sector and businesses come through this very difficult time, possibly through growth stimulus programs and so on. And the question is, certainly in the case of Jordan and Lebanon, is the EU also looking into further relaxing of rules of origin, free trade in services in order to try and help boost the local economies and small businesses as they cope with the recovery from COVID? So would appreciate it if you have at least an initial response on this, Michael. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Moise. A very good question. Actually, we know, and some of our colleagues who are with us here in this webinar may be aware of that, we have tried this already. We have tried this in the case of Jordan, and Minister Abadi can, I think, tell us a little bit more about that. Jordan in 2015 asked the European Union to relax the rules of origin in order to make it possible for industrial products produced in Jordan with the help of Syrian refugee labor force to enter the European market more easily. We have done this in 2016, and we have then, upon Jordanian requests, let's say, reformed the system and made it more general and more generous at the same time. The point is, however, of course, that whereas I think a couple of, and a very small number of companies and of investors have been benefiting from that, and Jordan very generously has taken this as an occasion to expand a huge number of work permits to the refugee population, that this has not become a panacea, neither for Jordan nor for the refugees, nor has it attracted, as we had hoped in the beginning, a large number of investors, for example, from Eastern Asia, so to invest in Jordan in order to export to the European market. And that has to do, of course, with the fact, with a number of facts. One of the facts is, of course, that you need to have quite a good knowledge of a complex and very demanding market as the European one, not only to meet the norms and standards, so the non-tariff barriers, so to say, that regulate such a market, but you need to be in the value chains, you need to have import-export relations, you need to have people inside the market who can bring your product into a highly competitive market, and that, of course, takes a lot of time. Secondly, some of the countries in the region, although they have a certain level of poverty and so forth, are not necessarily countries where you can produce at such a low cost that you would have a clear advantage over production in other countries. For many years, at least, for example, the production of an industrial unit in a country like Jordan was certainly not less expensive than, for example, some of the EU's own member states, such as Bulgaria or Romania. So the question is then, how attractive does this become? So in a nutshell, yes, the European Union is ready to do or to take measures of that kind. We have done so in the case of Jordan. Lebanon has also asked us to do so, and we're always ready to look into these things. But the kind of regulatory simplification and granting a country like Jordan the same kind of very advanced access to the European market as we have granted it to least developed countries in sub-Saharan Africa does not do the trick alone, and certainly not in a situation where you have a highly complex economic situation altogether. Now, last consideration in that context, Moise, at the end of the day, of course, behind this question, and this is also behind the question that you asked previously about climate change, is the thorny issue of whether host countries, the refugees themselves, and also the international community and donors assume that protractedness does not only mean 5, 6, 7, maybe 10 years, but maybe it could mean that you need to integrate people in the economy of the host country and ultimately perhaps in the society. We all know that this is anathema in a couple of countries that I don't want to mention that surround Syria. Only very, very few are open to this. And in as much, so to say, as you create such advantageous trade regimes, you obviously then expect that the people that are not passport holders of the host countries would become permanently employed, permanently members of the workforce there, permanently integrated also in the social security nets. And there is, of course, a lot of resistance against this, at least among some governments. And that also, if you allow me, is a little bit my reply to the question of climate change. Definitely climate change will be a marking feature, at least for the rest of this century, when it comes not only to what happens on this planet, but also when it comes to humanitarian needs. But I think at this moment in time, although we are now in year 10 of the Syrian crisis, all of us, we are still very much marked by the needs of the day. And the needs that stem from climate change and that will touch on the countries in the Middle East, that will touch also on the refugee communities and the IDPs, these are mid and long-term needs that we have to address, yes, but of course you first try to be an immediate responder to the immediate need. If I want to work on climate change issues like drought, like, for example, a lack of rainfall and so forth, then I need to work with communities that in a way are stable and want to develop resilience for this over 5 or 10 years. But of course, the assumption at this moment in time is that the presence of refugees among their host communities is more temporary. And I wonder whether we're already at the stage where we could go for some sort of mid and long-term development and humanitarian planning that takes into account the mid and long-term needs of climate change of all the populations concerned, whereas the societal acceptance for this may not yet be in place. Thank you.
Thank you. That was a very thorough answer. And I certainly think your last point on perhaps the need for a medium to long-term plan, I think is a very good one. That no matter how unpopular, I think it's something that, given the depth of the challenges we face, is something I think we certainly need to start fostering debate around. Okay, I'm very conscious of time. I will need to wrap up, but I'm going to ask two quick questions and to see if panelists would like to come in on this. One, there is a fear, of course, that with so many crises in the world right now, attention begins to divert elsewhere. So is there anything we can do to keep an attention on the Syria crisis, on the effects of the Syria crisis, and of course the effect it's having on the resilience of the refugees, host communities and governments? Any quick thoughts on that from the panelists?
Hi, good afternoon. Sorry, I tried to put my hand up, but it.
Please, Dan.
Thanks a lot. Just a very quick thought. I mean, it's an interesting one, and we look at, I think like all of us, we're re-ranking our priorities as a result of COVID, and things that were top priorities are kind of going down the list. That's always the nature of these things. I think there's a risk though that we set conflicts and issues up against each other, and we certainly don't want to prioritize the Syria conflict at the expense of other issues. So I would point to the importance of kind of better regional understanding of how we approach the issues that are affecting the region or the sub-region. I think that's very kind of pertinent in a COVID environment. We talked about climate change and the impacts that will have on the situation. I mean, we've not talked about the impacts of migration on the impacts of COVID on migration, all these things. But all this to say that if in the spirit of a resilience approach, very important that we look at these things not in isolation, but build up a more regional understanding of what the issues are and how we can work together on them. Thanks.
Dan, thank you for that. Certainly a very good suggestion that we don't put issues against each other, but we need to adapt far more cohesive and coherent approach to the region. So thank you very much. I'm going to terminate on one interesting question, perhaps a little bit provocative. And Minister Abadi, I think I'm going to address this to you for your thoughts. And the question is, with the Caesar Act now coming into force, is this going to affect the flow of funds Sorry, I'm going to repeat that, sorry. So with the CESAR Act coming into force, which could affect the flow of funds and negatively impact businesses, and particularly in the countries surrounding Syria, is there a sense that this perhaps could aggravate the kind of current socioeconomic challenges that the countries face, particularly Lebanon and Jordan, with regard to recovery, particularly in the business sector? Any thoughts, Minister Abadi? I see you're still there. I'm not sure you can hear me, but if not, any thoughts from anyone, perhaps, are the panelists on this? No? Okay, so perhaps it's a bit of a premature issue, and I think we're all still looking at the effects of this on the countries that could be on the front line, particularly Lebanon and Jordan. We are now, I think, just slightly over 20 minutes over time, so I'm going to try and do a very close wrap up, I think, of what were some of the key points that came up from all of you. And I really thank all the panelists for their presence here and their thoughts, and certainly, and I'm sorry to those who had more questions that we did not have more time for the dialogue. I certainly think, starting with Michael, that we really need to make sure that resilience is very much a connector between the humanitarian, the development and the peace building, but also a connector over time, that we are addressing not just the needs today, but certainly the needs that will be with us for a long time. And I think that's a very important point to retain. And also the issue of perhaps doing clearer collective needs assessment and trying to localize the nexus and its response as much as possible. I think a second point that came out so clearly from all the panelists is really the importance of using local institutions as the bedrock for our response in the region. And I think within that, I also want to pick up on a point that Minister Abadi made, which I think he underlined, that it's not just about institutions, but it's also about investing in people and also giving an important role to civil society when it comes to localizing the nexus. I think, Claudio, it was excellent that you also brought up the issue of the gap when we have this transition between the humanitarian and what comes next in terms of funding, and therefore how can we try and safeguard the most vulnerable in this gap, and how can we try and address the lack of resources during that time. I think, Sam, you had a really great point on resilience. Why aren't we better at addressing the why, and therefore also the importance of resilience and systems approaches to all of this. And of course, I think from the ILO, your various activities looking not just at supporting livelihoods at this time when the region is recovering from COVID, but also looking at safety in the workplace, I think are also important points that need to be taken into account in the resilience approach. And I finish, I think, probably on what will be one of the most pressing issues for resilience in the coming years, and which is climate change, and indeed how we need to look at that and make it much more, bring it much more to the fore of our current approach in the region. So on that, thank you all very, very much. I think that terminates the first session, and Natalie, it's really over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Moises. Thank you very much. This was really an insightful session, and that you wrapped up very well, so I will not get back on this. Just a point for the transition. Clearly the first session underscored the importance of investing heavily and extensively in local and national institutions, and to make sure that they can serve people in a sustainable manner. And I think this is perhaps one of the key message. But just to say that investing in local institutions, strengthening local institutions, national institutions, of course, is not an end in itself. Ultimately, institutions have to ensure inclusive and equitable access to services for people. So this second session, and I'm welcoming everyone, is focusing on the resilience of people and communities, looking at lessons learned and good practices from the past, but also from current action, and the opportunities also to leverage new resilience solutions through innovation, through partnerships, and that's something I believe has to come very strongly in the resilience response. Now we are thinking of building back better, but obviously with this constellation of crisis and multiple vulnerabilities, including those related to climate, as just mentioned, we need to build back differently. And I really hope that this session will provide very insightful examples of how we could move the resilience agenda, scale it up, but also adapting it to the new context. So the session will focus on livelihoods. Livelihoods is at the center, is a cornerstone of the resilience response, because it is a pathway to building people's self-reliance. But what has happened over the years, and we see it, is that obviously, and it's obvious now in the context of COVID as well, is that women and youth in particular, but also vulnerable groups such as people with disabilities, their needs need to be addressed and fully acknowledged. At the same time, those vulnerable groups, the youth, women, are not only vulnerable people, they're also change makers in the resilience agenda. And I really trust that this session will also point to this important notion that resilience starts from the people themselves as well, with the support of national systems and partners. We will be looking at social protection. As everybody knows, social protection has really come back on the agenda, the development agenda, very forcefully in the context of COVID, and obviously in the context of multiple crises. Protecting people is clearly giving them the means to rebound, to be resilient. So we will be hearing also from very knowledgeable speakers about prospects to enhance and expand social protection in an inclusive manner. A third very important dimension of the resilience agenda, and again in the context of multiple crises where services are stretched, as mentioned earlier by Michael and many other speakers, where the vulnerabilities of the people who were already vulnerable are exacerbated, there might be a risk of tensions. And building social cohesion is also an important tenet of the resilience response, to which this session will speak to. We will have 7 distinguished panelists, friends of resilience. Ms. Monica Noro, Deputy Regional Director, UNHCR, our colleague Nadia Wamle, Program Leader, Social Cohesion and Durable Solution from UNDP Iraq. We will have the privilege to have Mr. Assem Abi Ali, who is the General Supervisor of the Lebanese Crisis Response Plan, Ministry of Social Affairs in Lebanon. We will have on board as well Mrs. Ashigul Yeltsin Eris, Deputy General Coordinator from Assam in Turkey, and as well as Ms. Catherine Chels, Manager of the Durable Solution Platform. From our sister agencies at the regional level as well, we will have the privilege of listening to Kate Newton, who is the Deputy Regional Director, and we will hear also from our colleague from FAO, Alexis Bonte, who is the FAO representative at the interim in Jordan. But without delay, let me give the floor to Monica Noro for her to share perspectives on what building resilience for all means in practice. And let me just say that Monica and I have been working very closely together as part of our mandate with the 3RP in this region, and building resilience for all is clearly an important motto now. What does it mean in practice is essential. Where do we want to go is another important question in this new context. Monica, over to you.
Thank you very much, Natalie, and good afternoon to everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to set the scene for this second session on resilience, linkages with the livelihood opportunity, as Natalie was mentioning, but also the linkages to issues such as social cohesion and the durable solution agenda. Through its co-leadership with UNDP of the Regional Refugee and Resilience Plan, the 3RP, since 2015, UNHCR has been a strong supporter of resilience response in the main refugee hosting countries. Such approach has now been replicated elsewhere and is recognized globally through the Global Compact on Refugees in terms of how to deal with the impact of protracted displacement. The 3RP is implemented in support of national effort, and it is important to recognize this. Turkey, Lebanon, Jordan, Iraq, and Egypt generously have hosted the refugee men, women, girls, and boys, and they have been the primary responder to the Syria crisis. It is the host government who have retained their commitment in terms of providing access to safety protection, including registration, documentation, health, education, and livelihood opportunities. Across the region, around 2.5 million people receive cash assistance, increasing linkages to national social protection system. More than 1 million children are enrolled in formal education. More than 3.3 million health consultations are undertaken in public primary health care facilities. This is just to mention some of the achievements across the year through the 3RP effort, linking the humanitarian response and the resilience fund, the two dimensions. The 3RP has supported this national effort and set the pace globally for innovative and effective resilience programming that support both refugee and host countries to increase their self-reliance. These include increasingly moving towards cash-based assistance for Syrian refugees, promoting inclusive policies and target support for job and livelihood, and directly supporting local municipalities to deliver basic services to all in need. The current situation, of course, has dramatically affected everyone. From UNHCR perspective, many refugees were living close to the edge, and COVID-19 has effectively rendered this vulnerability more acute. For example, those dependent on daily wage labor are unable to find work, pushing refugees further into debt, removing the progress that they have made in becoming self-reliant and increasing protection risk. This is a challenge facing many urban and rural communities, of course, and not just the refugees. Vulnerable hosting community members, including the female-headed households, are mostly working in the informal sector and may not have access to adequate social safety net. And after nearly a decade of hosting some of the world's most vulnerable people, host governments are now hard hit by worsening economic conditions and mounting financial pressure. This in turn can fuel inequalities and impact social cohesion. Although we should recognize that the host governments across the region have worked hard to mitigate the risk of increasing social pressure. So against this backdrop, what should be our approach, particularly as it relates to pursuit of durable solution, and what is the role of resilience? UNHCR has adopted a comprehensive protection and solution approach to the Syria crisis, anchored in the Global Compact for Refugees and operationalized through the Refugee and Resilience Response Plan in host country. This approach encompasses: one, the support to host countries and pursuing protection and self-reliance of refugees; two, advocating for expanded resettlement and complementary pathway, and 3, enabling voluntary return. Further strengthening resilience at all levels and for everyone is a key part of this approach and to the realization of durable solutions. Let me highlight, to conclude, 3 priority areas moving forward. First, host country and community require an extraordinary level of support in these unprecedented times. As mentioned earlier, government and community are the primary responder and they need more support. This will help to withstand economic pressure, sustain service for all, reduce the risk of social pressure, and ensure continued asylum and protection for Syrian refugees, also to reduce the risk of refugees feeling forced to return prematurely. Such support can be provided through the TRP, but also bilaterally and through multilateral institutions. The second, to work toward dignity while in exile, helping refugees to become productive and have future while waiting for other solutions. Further expanding refugee ability to develop their humanitarian capital and become self-reliant is crucial to ensure dignity and productivity when in asylum. It's important to note the progress that's made in this area, emanating from previous international conference and initiatives by many of the host countries. Access to education, to health, legal work, documentation is critical. Third, enhancing support to those who made a voluntary decision to return. We cannot stand back and watch. If some refugees do indeed decide to return home, some of the most vulnerable will need support, and they are indeed approaching UNHCR, and we are supporting where needed. These include the provision of information, pre-departure counseling, help with documentation, assistance to those that have specific needs. Such support yields important protection dividend and increases the resilience and reducing the risk of harm during the journey, giving the best chance of ensuring every return is safe, dignified, and sustainable in a long run. Enhancing such support, including from a resilient perspective, would be critical moving forward, whether in host country or Syria. As we navigate the way forward, let me conclude by stressing the need to listen to refugee and host communities. Respecting and supporting their needs, concern, intention, and decision is crucial. Our job collectively is to listen to them and amplify their voices and try to address some of the obstacles or priorities they may be raising. This is a bedrock of the 3RP approach and ensure we can provide support in a way that promotes protection, strength, and resilience, contribute to dignified life, and in case of Syrian refugees, enable them to pursue durable solutions to bring an end to their displacement. With this, I thank you very much for your attention, and over to you, Natalie.
Thank you very much, Monica, also for recalling that national governments, local communities are in the driving seat of the response, and that all support should be provided. Thank you for recalling the need to pay attention to the tremendous challenge of informality, which is affecting, of course, refugees, but also large strands of host community, people in host communities in the context of COVID. I like your last point also on the need to listen to the people, refugee and host communities alike. Without delay, because I'm told that we are running late, it's true. I will invite my colleague Nadia Alawame to tell us more about ways and approaches to strengthen livelihood intervention, making sure that the needs of women and youth are taken care of, and that women, youth can also be empowered to build their own resilience, but also to build the resilience of the broader communities they are living in. Over to you, Nadia.
Yes, Thank you, Natalie. Good evening. Good evening, Moises and everyone. Thanks to the government of Finland for organizing this event and for being a major partner for UNDP Iraq. Its stabilization and resilience programs. As you know, Iraq has a protracted crisis starting in addition to the 250,000 Syrian refugees, mainly residing in Kurdistan region, came the ISIL controlling in 2014 over 20 cities, with leaving on 2017 a time of liberation with around 6 million Iraqi displaced and over reconstruction and recovery needs estimated at 88 billion USD. And by the end of 2019, around 75% of the internally displaced returned, while around 1.5 people remained internally displaced, roughly 80% are out of camp. And even those who returned, there's over 1,200,000 people are already remain in acute need. So UNDP and all international UN agencies has no choice but look at resilience in an integrated way and under a humanitarian development nexus. So UNDP has worked on promoting the recovery and resilience of these communities who were vulnerable to multi-dimensional shocks associated with large scales of return and protracted displacement of Iraqis and Syrian refugees. That was achieved through different integrated approaches, starting with the reconstruction and rehabilitated basic services, livelihood, social cohesion, among others. The livelihood focus at the beginning was on cash for work, as the main focus was on providing the people, the displaced, the host communities with the basic services needed, and starting with building the hospitals, the schools, and different water and electricity facilities that were needed in these communities. So cash for work was implemented, and mainly we focused on having at least 40% women in these projects, in addition also to other vulnerability factors that were analyzed through quick needs assessment at the targeted areas. Currently, UNDP is looking and is implementing a more medium-term programs for livelihoods, like vocational and employment and training, SMEs, grants for women-headed households. And that's all based on a conflict sensitivity and needs assessment in different areas. For the, also even during COVID-19, which has added more fragility and vulnerability to what already exists, still we could have managed to continue our programs, even cash for work, with protective and strict measures and distancing and online training for different beneficiaries. Also, there were some opportunities for women and youth working in factories, producing masks, working in sterilization of public spaces. And we could see that different groups who were trained by UNDP at the local level, whether through livelihoods or were being as mechanisms for peace, like women peace groups and youth networks, became very active in even voluntary work and in enhancing the social protection at their communities and in getting some job opportunities while responding to a COVID crisis. UNDP also is partnering with UNHCR and IOM now on applying the durable solution agenda and where we already are working on the return, facilitating the return and the reconciliation, but we will look at more full durable solution program by even considering the relocation and the IDP's choice of resettled in different areas. And there is a thorough discussion between the three agencies on piloting and supporting and advocating the durable solution agenda with the government of Iraq, which will also focus on different IDPs and refugees support, mainly with livelihoods. Another program that was led by UNDP and jointly having also IOM and UNHCR under the humanitarian development nexus is having a joint UN approach on dealing with ISIL-affiliated families, the return and reintegration of these groups. And we have pilots starting with facilitating return and social cohesion, livelihood support, and based on assessments and gender-sensitive response, and infrastructure.
Nadia, thanks. Just 1 minute left at your hand because we are running very late now, and I know that some of our panelists would need to leave a bit earlier than planned. So 1 minute for you to perhaps conclude on your own perspective on what needs to be done to make sure that women and youth and vulnerable groups there can be really empowered in the response, not simply recipients of the response. Over to you, Nadia.
Thank you. Yes, actually, it is in focus and in need to base our programs on needs assessment and vulnerability factors, and to have a gender strategy and vulnerable groups included in our planning for these programs, whether at the short or medium-term livelihood support.
Thank you very much, Nadia. I think obviously the experience of Iraq also is very, very, very interesting and should be fully integrated in the resilience approach. We are talking about Syrian refugees, we are talking about host communities, but we need to talk also about the needs, the special needs, vulnerabilities of the millions of internally displaced people that many countries in the region have also to deal with, and the experience of Iraq through the livelihoods programs and the way those programs are seeking to integrate women in a substantive manner, are trying to make youth and women actors of their own resilience, as I was saying, and the resilience of their communities in the context, of course, also of COVID-19 now is very, very interesting, and I believe there will be much to be learned of. Thank you again, Nadia. It's very nice to see you again, actually, and without delay, I will now give the floor to Mr. Assem Abi Ali, the General Supervisor of the Lebanon Crisis Response Plan, working at the Ministry of Social Affairs. As I was mentioning at the beginning of this session, if there is a word that really props up and comes up more strongly in the discourse on resilience here in the region, but also across the globe, is the word social protection. Social protection. So I'm now inviting Mr. Asim Abi Ali to give and share with us his perspectives on how the resilience response, including through support to national and local systems, can be leveraged to address the growing social protection needs of vulnerable people in an integrated manner. Over to you, Mr. Asim Abi Ali.
Thank you so much. I would like to thank the government of Finland and UNDP for the organization of this event. The world is passing through critical historical moments. Economies are falling, people are suffering, and the entire international system we know is at risk of collapsing. This was all caused and exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic. In Lebanon, the consequences of the pandemic are more devastating since it is one problem added to many others, culminating in the worst economic crisis in Lebanese history. Lebanon is a 10,452 square kilometers country, hosting more than 1.5 million Syrian displaced and more than 180,000 Palestinian refugees, a figure which constitutes 1/3 of the entire population, making it the highest number of refugees per capita in the world. This economic crisis resulted in a dramatic devaluation of the Lebanese lira, huge inflation, skyrocketing unemployment rate, more than 50%, and 55% of Lebanese households are living below the poverty line. The situation among the Syrian displaced is not any better. 74% of the displaced are living below the poverty line, and 55% of them are living below the survival minimum expenditure basket. The COVID-19 pandemic is accelerating the deterioration of the economy and might deprive the most vulnerable Lebanese and Syrians from receiving medical treatment of COVID-19 due to limited medical resources. In addition to the high unemployment rate, 1 out of 3 working Lebanese experienced salary cuts in the past months due to COVID-19. The majority of Lebanese households, as well as the Syrian displaced, are now vulnerable and in need for support and protection on multiple levels. The current situation in Lebanon requires a humanitarian intervention to help the increasingly vulnerable communities, all the while providing an exit strategy that empowers them and helps them get out of poverty through implementing developmental approaches. Given that, the Ministry of Social Affairs has launched the National Social Solidarity Program, NSSP, as a COVID-19 response to help vulnerable Lebanese by providing cash assistance of for 200,000 Lebanese households. The Ministry of Social Affairs has also launched the Impact Platform in cooperation with the Presidency of the Council of Ministers, PCM, Ministry of Interior, and other ministries and administrations. The Impact, which is inter-municipality platform for assessment, coordination, and tracking, included questions that indicate household vulnerability. And for the first time in our history, we have created a program with a huge database of about 467,000 Lebanese households. In parallel to the NSSP, the Ministry of Social Affairs took the initiative to prepare a national social protection plan in cooperation with 9 ministries, civil society organizations, and UN agencies. We believe that at this critical phase of alarming poverty and unemployment rates, we need to optimize available resources to to have a holistic social protection umbrella that guarantees to any citizens to live with dignity in their country. We know that the NSSP is a short-term social safety net project, which is one pillar of the social protection framework that is a long-term strategy. However, to be realistic and not to dream big, we need reasonable, doable social protection services, taking into account the priorities and the scarce resources of the government. In order to achieve this holistic social protection system and to move from short-term emergency response to long-term social protection, we need to think of an exit plan. This plan should be a comprehensive package that empowers communities, provides medical care, strengthens their resilience, enhances livelihoods, builds capacity of human resources and public institutions, and also mobilizes responsible investments in social and economic development. For example, rural development, which can provide the communities with the tools to be self-dependent and to graduate from poverty by implementing productive means. Our international partners and friends have been generous with Lebanon throughout the past years in responding to the Syrian crisis, despite the fact that the funds never meeting the increasing needs. For example, the currently available funds in LCRP are only 16% of the total appraised funds in 2020. Nowadays, and due to the high risk of tension among Lebanese and Syrians, markedly threatening social stability, we demand a balanced response that applies a conflict-sensitive approach. We ask our friends to stand next to Lebanon in the critical time to increase their support to the vulnerable communities, Syrians, Lebanese, Palestinians, and enhance the new initiatives by the Lebanese government, and to channel their support to the Lebanese through LCRP, NSSP, and the National Social Protection Plan. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Assam Abi Ali, for your insights on how large the social protection needs have become in Lebanon as a result of COVID, also compounding other crises. And the key point you make is that clearly there is a need now, looking into the future, to build solid social protection system in a country like Lebanon, and not to simply rely on short-term social assistance, but to provide social protection on a more holistic basis, because vulnerabilities are broad and widespread, and to move from the short term to the long term. Another point I think was very important, to be able to build inclusive social protection systems, we need to build evidences on the vulnerabilities. You need to build registries. You need to have strong databases to be able to develop the system. Thanks for this. Social protection, as we know, is a key pathway for resilience building everywhere, and we see it now more than ever. We are, again, I'm sorry, but we have been running late, and I know that our colleague Kate Newton from WP would like, if possible, to speak a bit earlier. So without delay, I will pass on the floor to our colleague Ms. Ashik Gulialsun-Aris for a short intervention touching upon a very important dimension of the resilience agenda and all efforts and cross-cutting dimensions, so to speak, of the resilience response, which is the management of possible tensions due to the pressures that the multiple crises are exerting on people, on systems. So over to you, Ms. Asha Gulialsin, for your intervention.
Thank you very much for the floor, and I would like to thank for the organization and having me here. As you thought that the subject that I'm speaking about is quite difficult to summarize in 5 minutes, but I will try to do my best. And in addition to including the government, I would also like to include international communities in this discussion, because together with the governments, international communities also have responsibilities for burden sharing, and they too are important actors in response. Actually, involving all actors for support to the refugee is crucial in a united response to this crisis, both now and over the longer term, from governments to international organizations, municipalities, the private sector, NGOs, academics, refugees, civil society, cities, support organizations, and the others. Before I start to talk about social cohesion, I realized that we need a joint conceptualization of social cohesion in order to identify the indicators and evaluate the impacts. This is important as the concept itself can be understood differently by the actors. Also, it is important to maintain a proper coordination of social cohesion to reach the goals. In Turkey, language remains a key problem for the Turkey context in building cohesion, as it undermines the refugees' ability to communicate with Turkish communities, including employers to be informed about work opportunities or about the legal framework, both in terms of their social rights and protection, and also obligation. In this regard, we need to focus on enhancing collaboration with the ministries of national education, interior affairs, family, labor and social security, youth and supports. And also the role of media in general and social media in particular are other key factors of social cohesion. There is still a strong impact of the media in increasing negative and wrong perception towards Syrians, but governmental bodies and international communities must support the NGOs and the platforms that have built a mechanism and that are working hard on ways to change negative perceptions and highlighting the facts both in media and social media. To access formal livelihood opportunities, new and alternative solutions and support mechanisms should be introduced or supported by governments and international communities. The market in Turkey should be supported by the actors for recruiting more Syrians, as the market's current capacity is not enough to sustain refugees, and since it has been hardly hit by COVID-19. Employment of refugee women should be encouraged through trainings and language courses, and once they are out of home, it is important to use that opportunity to support them in all kinds of manners and provide PSS services to empower them and build their resilience. Also, one of the other key factors is provide a comprehensive services. Social cohesion activities are usually organized as one-off events. Instead, the activities should be considered as a whole, and all kinds of services should be designed and provided comprehensively with a holistic perspective. Dedicated social cohesion activities need to be structured within proper programs. A comprehensive policy regarding social cohesion should be determined, and state institutions and governments and all other actors should be involved in all process. Also, donors need to be innovative with funding towards local NGOs. Direct fundings to local NGOs will contribute to the process of local integration. More flexible and varied funding opportunities for NGOs are needed and very important. Changes in programmatic schemes would be highly useful, since time limits are not realistic to achieve social cohesion aims, which take years, not 12 months or 2 years. Besides economic support, PSS support has to be provided. Being a move, and of course the pandemic, are creating a sense of uncertainty. Refugees tend to feel hopeless. For enhancing resilience of the community, cultivating positive thinking approach is another key factor for the community, for the resilience. The EU, European countries, and the international community must continue to their duty and share the responsibilities by opening safe channels such as resettlement or humanitarian visas, and provide better financial aid to assist the countries which are receiving migrants and refugees. European countries should extensively increase the existing resettlement quotas. The pandemic is not only challenging global health systems, but also testing our common humanity. The worst may be yet to come, sorry for that, but especially in the developing world and the countries. Considering the possible wider impact of an outbreak in host communities, support for the host and the refugees in urban setting is in everyone's interest. Thank you for the time and the opportunity to deliver my words and thoughts. I hope I could strict my timeline.
You were perfect. Thank you very much. Thank you for your very enlightening contribution on a topic that we are not addressing all the time and always. And what we say, what is resilience? And of course, what does it mean in practice when we talk about social cohesion, which is essential for both individual, community, and institutional resilience and economic resilience. We are not. It's very important to unpack the concept, and I think there is perhaps more thinking, and your intervention was very inspiring. One or two takeaways. You mentioned something very important, is that we should not think of social cohesion in terms of one-off events to bring people together, and this is all finished. But we have to think about social cohesion really at the very outset of our resilience response and across all the sectors. So that's one a very important point that also echoes the point made by our colleague Nadia earlier about the need also to be aware of the risk, of the sensitivities of people right away, to be able to address them in the best way. Another important point is the need also to, you cannot work on social cohesion once again without broad-based partnerships. And you mentioned about, of course, collaborations with key ministries engaged in education in particular, because that's where, through education also, that people can build or not peaceful societies and communities, working closely with local governments, but also with the medias, because the medias are also the one who are sending the right or the wrong messages when it comes to social cohesion. The need, of course, to strengthen the localization agenda and to support local NGOs working in the ground and who are at the forefront of the response. And I think that's a point that was also raised in the first session this morning. So thank you very much for this contribution. And let me now pass the floor to Ms. Catherine Echels, who is the manager of Durable Solution Platform Syria. Over to you, Catherine.
Thank you very much, and thank you for giving me the time to speak today. I will be brief, given I am going to be repeating a lot of what previous colleagues have already spoken about. But through DSP's research work, we've identified a number of key findings and lessons that really link resilience-based approaches, particularly in host countries, to the broader durable solutions agenda. As Syrian refugees experience ever more protracted displacement, resilience approaches are vital both to support their dignified life in displacement, but also to act as a stepping stone in supporting displaced persons on their pathways towards eventual durable solutions. We talk about eventual durable solutions because the sheer scale and the protracted nature of displacement in and from Syria mean that there is no single short-term route to ending displacement, and currently no real viable prospect for a solution for the majority of people in the near future. That means that in hosting countries, we really need to emphasize a medium-term approach to assisting people in displacement, promoting self-reliance, enabling displaced communities to support themselves, and to strengthen the capacities of both host countries, as we heard, but also host communities. By focusing on medium-term approaches, we can recognize that while durable solutions may feel elusive right now, steps can still be taken that promote the rights of displaced people and vulnerable host communities to live safely, securely, and with dignity in their displacement, and that enhanced resilience and self-reliance contributes to the pursuit of the various different durable solutions that exist, enabling people to realize their individual preferences and choices when the time comes to be able to make host. While there has been a lot of progress, I think, as noted in promote resilience in hosting state, I think that was still far from sufficient to carry the needs. And I think what we've seen is that the limited progress we were able to make is under so much threat because of the impacts of COVID and the economic climate. These represent both a risk for the gains more generally, but are a specific significant risk for people in maintaining pathways towards durable solutions because they're falling into poverty. It's a threat to social cohesion, and it risks pushing people towards unwanted, unsafe, and unsustainable decision-making about the choices they make about their displacement. So alongside efforts to maintain and promote a self-protected environment for displaced people and vulnerable host communities, we have to have renewed and sustainable efforts to ensure sustainable and lasting access to livelihoods and basic services from a durable solutions lens with our resilience colleagues in order to maintain that ability to move out of displacement in the future. And I'm going to just talk about 4 very brief specific points that we think really can help to do this. So first, when we talk about taking a medium-term approach, that means a couple of things. It means we need much more strengthened donor leadership and coordination and funding to protect the investments of the last 9 years, to build on them, to reinforce them, and to sustain them in the current climate. That includes more than ever multi-year predictable funding, as I think colleagues mentioned at the very beginning of the session, and promoting and focusing on greater inclusion of refugees within national strategies and policy frameworks that have also been talked about. This needs to ensure the relevance and coherence between the necessary emergency responses that we're undertaking now and recovery plans, so that short-term decision-making isn't having longer-term negative impacts in terms of, for example, where funding is allocated now and where it's taken from. This also needs to include ensuring cash assistance is linked to complementary services, including livelihood support where that's possible, recognizing and addressing, as we've talked about, the significant gaps in social safety nets, which have really been shown in stark relief because of the COVID crisis, and ensuring continued access to basic services. Second, when we're looking at adaptations that might be needed in response to economic and livelihood changes, we need to think about the resilience of micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises run by and employing displaced people, as well as decent work interventions and access to jobs. We need to look at how do we build the resilience of these enterprises in the context of COVID and the longer-term economic climate that will exist. That includes expanding access to labour markets, looking at how we can promote growth in certain sectors, particularly agro-food and renewable energy, as well as looking at how we can move support digitally, such as using online skills training, vocational training, access to mobile wallets, the use of media platform and e-marketing channels, which have all been successfully used before. But we also need to be careful to not see digital as the solution to everything here, because there is not necessarily always a conducive environment for moving things online when we have limitations on access to internet in lots of displaced communities. Third, we need to make sure that we continue to provide and expand basic services and service delivery, particularly looking at those that take an integrated approach to help both refugees and vulnerable host communities to foster an environment of self-reliance, social cohesion, as my previous colleague mentioned, and maintaining people's pathways towards all available to durable solutions. And fourth and finally, we must not lose sight of maintaining and improving the protective environment that resilience and livelihood interventions take place in, including legal and regulatory frameworks that can act as barriers to accessing livelihoods, work, basic services, impede self-reliance, and actually undermine people's chances of actually being able to progress towards durable solutions when they become available. I will finish here by just saying that for the vast majority of people that have been interviewed recently for a joint report that DSP was involved in, most of them do not see a viable prospect of achieving a durable solution in the next 5 to 10 years, and many are weighing factors that basically amount to them choosing the least bad option for themselves and their families, both in terms of their safety and their access to livelihoods, jobs, and services. It's really important that we commit to a holistic approach to durable solutions, acknowledging that this is not a conversation that is just about return, but is about all of the available durable solutions, and again, has been repeated, is guided by the views and wishes of displaced people. With the inevitable reality of long-term hosting in the region because of the lack of progress inside Syria, it is of absolute importance that the resilience approaches are incorporated and built into a holistic durable solutions framework and approach, that they continue to be scaled up and funded, and that they are able to act as a stepping stone in supporting the people in their pathways to a durable solution, whichever one they ultimately want and choose for themselves and their families.
Thanks, Catherine. Thank you very much for your insightful presentation, an extremely rich presentation. So I will start in terms of takeaway, I mean, the last point you say is we need to explore really every possible options for the durable solution agenda. If I got your point right, of course, we need to think about sustainable livelihoods and so forth. I take the point you made right now, and I think this is something which perhaps is bringing also this new dimension in the resilience agenda, and the resilience response is to build the resilience of businesses, and in particular the micro and small businesses, which are also the major employers of vulnerable people in our region. So these are, I believe, very important things. Of course, you also reiterated the need to get the basic rights if we want to be serious with a resilience response, given especially the dynamic context. We need also to reshape the financial architecture of the response and to make sure that we can access multi-year flexible funding, precisely to be agile, to be able to respond to needs in a better way. And of course, the need to strengthen, I think it was mentioned earlier this morning also, you mentioned about the need to ensure some kind of policy coherence between the response, including when it comes to the durable solution agenda and the national development agendas and the national strategies. I hope I got you right because you were speaking very, very fast, but thanks again for your contribution. I will now pass it on to Kate Newton. I hope, Kate, you're still online, knowing that we were running a little bit late, and we were trying to accommodate that. Kate, are you online? Kate Newton
I'm
from
here. I don't know
WFP.
if you can see me.
Thank you so much, Kate, and our apologies. It's
no problem.
Learning
No
by
problem.
doing for all of us. Thank you so much. Over to you.
Well, first of all, thank you very much to UNDP and the Government of Finland for hosting. We really appreciate it. It's been a very rich discussion. I think most of the points that I was going to make have been covered. I'm not going to repeat them. Looking at WFP's response across the region in the last 7 years, I think a couple of the points that have been raised have come out really clearly in our response. And I hope that we did our best to grip the issue both of consultation with refugees and localization, and we certainly haven't perfected it, but we've moved a long way towards doing quite well on both, with lots of challenges. We were asked today to think a bit about the lessons we've learned and what we've done well and what we might do differently. So, I mean, just reflecting, there's been a lot of discussion today on the importance of social protection, which of course we all think is a good thing. Social protection is expensive, it's complicated, and we have in the humanitarian world these big budgets. So I think the complexity was how you bring the two together. How do you bring these big humanitarian budgets together with national systems? And you know, yes, coordination can always be strengthened, but a massive amount has been achieved in coordination, both with national governments. I think we've seen quite amazing examples of working with the governments of Lebanon and Jordan. And for example, WFP doing a lot of cash delivery, but really building on the national platforms which exist, helping to digitize national systems, helping to do the assessments and the verification, both of refugees, but also the host communities, which has been so important in that process, and then looking at how that's taken forward so that the humanitarian work that's been done in the region is actually helping to build the social protection systems in these countries. And of course, Turkey is a very significant case in point, where I think it's the largest cash delivery program that WFP has ever run, with 1.7 million beneficiaries, and now it's been handed over to the Turkish Red Crescent. So it's been localized essentially. Also, the school feeding programs that have come out of this response, we've managed to adapt them to the COVID crisis. The children that haven't been going to school, most of them are taking take-home rations if that's been possible, at least to make sure that they're able to have a nutritious snack while they continue some kind of learning from home. And I think the other big piece that's been really valuable for us has been the partnerships. Again, it's taken time, it's been difficult, but we've done it. And we're continuing to work more closely now than ever before with the World Bank. And the experience across the Middle East region is helping us to really frame our relationship with the World Bank across other regions as well. So I think I will stop there, but we'd like to remain part of the discussion, obviously, and to bring hopefully our experiences and our ongoing challenges to bear. Many thanks.
Thank you so much, Kate. Yeah, social protection, and I think what you mentioned, and I think which really makes the difference in the context of the resilience agenda is to make sure that the tremendous amount of social assistance which is provided to people in need in the region does not remain disconnected from the social protection needs of the country as a whole, and the need, as we said, to improve, to seize the opportunity also to bring improvements into national social protection system in a way that can make them more inclusive, more shock responsive, and so forth. And this is something obviously where WFP and other sister agencies have been trying to invest in the past couple of years, including through innovative approaches, new platforms, the use of digitalization, if I'm not mistaken, and of course, which is, of course, very much needed in the new context as well. So those systemic changes are possible within a resilience response that precisely connects the humanitarian and the development partners together. Thank you so much again for your contribution, Kate. Thanks a lot. I think we have now one of our last speaker, Mr. Alexis Bonte. Bonjour, Alexis. I hope you are still online to share some perspectives from FAO on the resilience response in the context of the multiple crises we are facing, if possible with a focus on women's empowerment and youth empowerment, and what your organization is doing, and what partners at large should be doing more and better to advance the agenda. Over to you.
Thank you, Natalie, and I wouldn't say that to be the last speaker reminds me of my time at school, but it's a good pleasure to be together. And again, good afternoon to everybody. Thanks for this opportunity to share information and experiences on how we can always try to improve our support to the people suffering for this long-lasting humanitarian crisis. So with this objective of trying to improve our support to households and communities, I wanted to share with you two things. One is a tool to measure resilience, and that can help us for better programming. And the second one is a livelihood opportunity, especially for women. You know, opportunities, we can take them even coming from a big disruption like a conflict. I guess we will all remember, and we all know, the difference in the condition of living for the women in Europe before the world wars and after the world wars. They had more access to education, more access to political changes, and to job opportunities. So I think there's a momentum here that we have to take and to try to make big changes for the long term for the women, and that's part of our alignment with the Build Back Better engagement. The first one is called the RIMA, and that stands for Resilience Index Measurement Analysis. And I think it's important to measure, to better understand, and to learn how we can improve our activities in terms of resilience. So it's a multi-dimension approach, looking at aggregated indicators to evaluate how evolves the resilience through the time frame of a project. It's based on 4 main types of indicators. So the first one is on access to basic services like school and health facilities. The second one is on the assets. So it's the ownership level of the households that will reflect the wealth of the family, of the community. The third one is access to social safety net, and that can be from within the family, the support from within the family, or remittances, or support from the fact that you are a member of a group or NGOs or UN system or international assistance. And the last one is the adaptive capacity, and that's where we look at income diversity, level of education within the household. So we have these 4, let's say, cluster of indicators that we are looking at, and that's part of the RIMA methodology. This RIMA has been already supported by the EU for more than 10 years and in 15 countries. It started in Africa, recently in Latin America and in Asia. But here in Middle East, FAO, we have started to apply the RIMA methodology on 2 EU-funded projects in Iraq and in Jordan. But also with the UN Women, we have done a series of exercises in 3 countries. And that gave the opportunity for UN Women to have now a gender-sensitive RIMA that has been contextualized to their theory of change. So the main interest, again, of the RIMA is to evaluate how evolves the resilience of a household supported by specific activities. And activities can be cash for work, grants, agriculture input, jobs, etc. So, and based on this information, we can better adjust our programs to serve the people. One of the findings of the work we have been doing with the UN Women is that cash transfer is very important, but it's a very short-term impact. And it works as long as the project is going on. But as soon as the project stops, you have a high probability that either you arrive to a plateau in terms of evolution of the resilience, or you can even decrease the level of resilience. So then we have to find some lessons on the way to provide more predictable or more stable income for these families, which we know is not an easy option for government or for private sector because they cannot offer endless opportunities in terms of job creation. And that's what brings us now to the second point that I wanted to share with you, is to give more perspective to the livelihoods of the families. And that was mentioned by the Minister of the MOPIC in Jordan earlier. So the idea or the principle is to link the cash transfer project to saving and loan schemes, such as what we call the VSLA, Village Saving and Loans Association. So people can use part of the cash transfer that they are earning, or maybe the project can increase a bit the amount provided to the people. And then that amount can be invested and to establish the initial capital of the saving and loans. So there are different modalities, of course, to establish this initial capital. These saving and loan schemes exist almost everywhere in the world. In Africa, it's called the tontine. Latin America, it's called the caja rural. And even here in the Middle East, it also exists. In Jordan, they call it jamiye. Now, the situation is that we have many projects on cash transfer, few on saving and loans, but almost none doing the combination between the 2 modalities of working. While this is what is making a big difference in the project. It's making a big difference because of saving and loans. They offer opportunity to invest in income generating activities. It makes the members of the groups less, let's say, strictly dependent on external assistance, which is not always very predictable, and also it makes the people more self-reliant and therefore more resilient. So we don't have the time to go into the details of how the saving and...
Thank you so much, Alec. Thank you so much for this. No, it's just that we have been running, so I thought you were over with your second point.
No, just, that's almost the end.
Anyways, 30 seconds left.
Okay, so I just wanted to say that saving and loans combined with the cash transfer, it's also like a total protection system, but made by the community. Then, of course, the saving and loans depends, the success of the saving and loans depends on the context and the members, but I think we should never underestimate the seriousness and the creativity of the women in the Middle East, especially when the well-being of the family is at stake. So I really think that we should try to combine these 2 approaches, cash transfer and saving and loans, in our respective strategies. Thank you very much. I'm sorry if I was a bit long.
Very important, thank you very much. I think you touched upon a very important point that actually was not extensively discussed, is this issue of measurement, measuring resilience. How do we measure resilience? And of course, the experience of FAO with the RIMA, with this resilience index, is extremely interesting, and there is much, I'm sure, we will be able to learn as we move ahead. That's interesting also because this morning we heard about institutional resilience. Today we heard about building resilience of businesses. So all these different tracks from the household level up to the institutional level, perhaps, if I may, should also be seen as part of the resilience measurement agenda that, and this would be an important takeaway also from this very insightful meeting. The second point, of course, is how, again, and once again, that's key in the discussion on resilience, how do we link the long term, the short term and the long term? How do we ensure that what we are giving now will be sustainable and will be a way to create sustainable livelihoods for people? And this issue of linking cash support and savings is certainly very interesting, and I'm sure there is much to be learned from this also, because this is essential, and because being able to save is precisely a way to be able to anticipate and to be able to cope with future shocks. So thank you very much, Alex, for this. I will possibly now hand over to my colleague Moises, perhaps to see if there are questions from his side. We did not receive more questions through the Q&A box at this particular juncture, and of course this is already such a very insightful discussion, but we had still a question perhaps that I would like to direct to Mr. Asim Abistali. There were questions about the need, of course, to build the resilience of the Lebanese economy. And I would like to direct and to get the views maybe from Mr. Asim Abi Ali and other panelists on what they think are the best pathway to also restore confidence in the Lebanese economy and the banking system. Does anyone want to jump on this important question?
Okay, may I answer?
Thank you very much, Mr. Asim.
You're welcome. First of all, I would like to answer Ms. Farah Abul Sil. I didn't say that the presence of Syrian displaced and COVID are the cause of the economic crisis in Lebanon. I said that COVID is one problem added to many others. And the presence of Syrian displaced is a huge, costly responsibility Lebanon took many years ago. You can say it's a shared responsibility with our international friends. That's why we come to Brussels, to get this help from partners willing to generously provide it. Our safety net programs are to respond to this existing crisis that left most people residing in Lebanon, whether Syrian, Lebanese, or any other nationality, vulnerable and in need. We are aware of the challenges regarding currency, banks, and our entire financial system, but we need to work on short-term and long-term strategies to get out from this critical situation we are in. We should and have to stand up again by implementing productive approaches that change our mindset in Lebanon from a consumer-based economy to a more productive economy. So this is a major issue. Okay, so to answer your question, that's it. We have to change our mindset, economic mindset, to a more productive means and a productive economy that implement developmental approaches and long-term sustainable projects that can allow people to be productive and to graduate from poverty and to have an exit plan for this assistance. Billions of dollars in assistance for basic assistance. We don't need them in the long term. In the long term, we need to be working independently and to be self-dependent. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Asim. I don't see more questions or is there one? Excellent, maybe I could not access it.
If I may,
Anna, sure.
There's a question on how we can strengthen planning and funding commitments to ensure that host states can be in a position to accept a dialogue about a proper transition agenda.
I'm not sure who would like to perhaps further elaborate on this. Maybe Mr. Asim again, or anyone else on the panel, maybe.
Sorry, can you repeat the question, please?
Yeah, maybe the question was not fully clear. I can repeat the question.
Please do.
You can repeat the question, sorry. How can we strengthen planning and funding commitments to ensure that host states will be in a position to accept a dialogue about the proper transition agenda? I'm not sure if the question itself is.
I don't know the question itself, but I believe that we can combine efforts. We have to work on our national plan for resilience and development, and we need also our international partners to help us and with insights, with advice, and to be on our side and be aligned with our plan for the long term. And also, I would like to add for your previous question regarding resilience, and I believe that we should build hope. Hope is a major issue that maybe empowers people to wake up in the morning and think that this day will be better than the day that passed. I believe that the refugees, the Syrian refugees, should also have hope that one day they will be able to return to their country, to their homeland safely and with all the dignity and security.
Thank you so much. I think it's a beautiful and very insightful conclusion for this meeting. I will hand over now to my colleague Moises for a few wrapping remarks. Moises, over to you.
Thank you very much, Natalie. Another really rich session. I think the key takeaway in this really rich discussion is that we have done a lot with regards to resilience, and we are here because resilience has been such an important part of the international response to the Syria crisis. But I think that if what we take away is that given where we are in the region right now and the types of challenges that we are facing, it is really time to revise that resilience approach, I think, collectively, to be able to make sure that our partnership between international partners and national institutions really begin to strengthen our ability to stimulate, whether it is economic growth or sustainable development or social stability and or cohesion. And I think some of the things that were touched upon here are really areas that we need to further look into how we really better integrate them in that response. Things such as social protection, the climate change, the use of national modalities, national funding modalities within national institutions and so on, and climate change, of course. And I think those issues we need to go back and really think how we can improve the response along those lines. And of course, I'm sure there were many other things, but I think that the central point that the resilience approach really needs to link short and longer term needs that will be with us for a long time, I think is something that we need to take well into account and possibly move towards indeed much more medium-term frameworks for our response. On that, thank you all very much. And I pass back over to you, Natalie.
Well, thank you, Moises. I think you made a very articulated summary of some of the key takeaways of these two very insightful sessions. So clearly we need to not necessarily to revisit, but to elevate the resilience agenda, because the challenges now are much bigger than ever. So we need to definitely go for more integrated approach, broader partnerships, and for this we need to reflect also on what we are doing well already with partners at all levels, the local level with international financial institutions. We heard that some colleagues from WFP are now engaging also with IFIs on social protection. So there is much to be learned to scale up. So thanks. But I would like again to perhaps zoom again a little bit on the people dimension of this resilience agenda, because of course we need to build the resilience of the economy, society, systems, but ultimately we are talking also about people and vulnerable people, and we should never forget that. And what Mr. Assem said from Lebanon, I think, is a wonderful concluding word for this session. He talked about hope. We need to build hope. We need to keep hope going on in the midst of multiple crises. So let me thank everyone again. And I think that, yes, the resilience response is here to bring hope and to bring a future, a long-term future for everyone. Thank you so much. Thanks to all participants. It's always a bit weird to say goodbye in such settings, but it was really, really a very informative meeting with a lot of insights. We have to digest all this and turn it into action. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.